Michael Turner looked like the perfect husband, but behind the closed doors of his Ontario home, Priya Sharma was living a nightmare that no one around them could see. Her mysterious disappearance led investigators to a shocking discovery in the basement. Michael Turner was known in his neighborhood as the polite, soft-spoken man who kept his lawn neat and always waved when passing by. To outsiders, he seemed like the image of stability man who had finally found love after years of living alone. His new wife, Priya Sharma, arrived in Ontario with him just a few months earlier, a young woman who left behind her family in India to begin a married life thousands of miles away. Their brick house with white shutters stood on a quiet street. The kind of place where nothing remarkable ever happened, but within those walls a story was beginning that no one could have imagined. When Priya first stepped off the plane, her smile was full of hope. She had dreamed of starting fresh in a new country, of building a future alongside her husband. Michael had met her through family acquaintances during his visit to India, and the marriage had been quick. To Priya's parents, Michael appeared respectable, successful, and able to provide a stable home. The wedding had been modest but full of traditions. And when she said goodbye to her family, Priya carried both excitement and nervousness. She was entering not only a marriage, but an entirely new life in a foreign land. Life in Ontario, however, was much harsher than she had expected. The bitter winter kept her indoors. The language barrier made her hesitant in public, and the distance from her family weighed heavily on her heart. Michael did little to ease her transition. Instead of encouraging her to explore, he discouraged her from going out alone. He told her the neighbors wouldn't understand her, that she should stay inside until she adjusted. Soon, Priya's world shrank to the walls of their house. She cooked, cleaned, and waited for Michael to return from work, but her isolation grew unbearable. Neighbors noticed the contrast between them. Michael was often outside shoveling snow, working on his garden, or chatting briefly with David Miller from across the street. Priya, however, was rarely seen. Karen Lopez, who lived next door, recalled only glimpsing her once through the upstairs window. Some assumed she was shy, still adjusting to a new surroundings. Nobody suspected that her invisibility was carefully orchestrated. Behind closed doors, Michael's true personality emerged. He liked control, and the more he exerted it, the less room Priya had to breathe. He handled all the money, decided what food she should buy, and dismissed her requests to take classes or find a job. He insisted it was too soon for her to be independent, that she needed to learn to be a wife first. Priya's voice grew smaller, her calls to her family shorter, always guarded as Michael lingered nearby. Still, she tried to adapt. She wrote in a small diary hidden beneath her clothes, recording her feelings of loneliness and fear. She looked at her wedding photos and wondered how the man who once seemed so charming could become so cold. For Priya, the house that was meant to be a home began to feel like a cage. For Michael, it was a stage where he could maintain a perfect outward image while hiding the shadows that were slowly creeping into their lives. Michael's grip on Priya's life tightened with every passing week. What began as subtle control soon grew into strict rules that dictated her daily existence. He wanted her to wake at specific hours, prepare his meals exactly to his liking, and avoid speaking to strangers. At first, Priya thought it was part of the adjustment, a phase that might soften with time. But the more she tried to please him, the more impossible his demands became. He criticized her cooking, monitored her movements, and dismissed her desire to contact her family. To Michael, love meant possession, and he believed he had every right to decide how Priya lived. Priya's loneliness deepened in silence. She longed to step outside without fear, to breathe in the fresh air, to feel like herself again. Her few calls to India became the only moments of comfort she had. She would lower her voice, careful not to draw Michael's attention, and tell her parents that everything was fine, even when it wasn't. Her mother sensed the strain, but Priya never revealed the full truth. The fear of causing them pain kept her from admitting just how trapped she felt. Her cousin Annika, however, was more perceptive. During one hurried conversation, she pressed Priya to explain why she always sounded rushed and guarded. Priya hesitated, but finally whispered that Michael had started to record her calls. Annika was alarmed, though Priya begged her not to tell anyone else. Meanwhile, Michael's paranoia began to poison his mind. He became convinced that Priya would leave him, embarrassed by the idea of being abandoned after bringing her from another country. The thought of losing control over her was unbearable. He began installing hidden cameras around the house, small devices tucked into corners and behind shelves. He checked them constantly, looking for signs that she was planning something, when he noticed her whispering on the phone. He demanded to know who she was speaking to and why. Priya's explanations never satisfied him. His control extended beyond surveillance. He forbade her from stepping into the backyard unless he was present, claiming it was unsafe. He took away her access to the internet, saying she didn't need it. He began locking the front door from the outside whenever he went to work, making sure she had no chance to leave. To their neighbors, Michael still appeared as the charming man with a friendly smile, while Priya remained invisible, her voice swallowed by the walls. Priya started writing longer entries in her hidden diary, describing her fear that her marriage was becoming dangerous. She wrote about the chains Michael had recently bought, about the excuses he gave when she asked what they were for. He had said they were for a home renovation project, but she couldn't shake the dread that his intentions were darker. The tension inside the house was like a storm building, silently, its thunder rumbling out of sight. Every day, Priya hoped for a chance to escape, to reach out to her cousin again, to find help before it was too late. Michael, however, was already moving further into obsession, constructing not a home, but a trap that would soon seal Priya's fate. The storm inside the Turner household finally broke one icy January night, when an argument spiraled beyond anything Priya had endured before. Michael had been in one of his suspicious moods, replaying the footage from his hidden cameras, scrutinizing every movement she made. He confronted her about a brief call she had made to her cousin Annika earlier that week, accusing her of plotting to leave him. Priya denied it, her voice trembling as she tried to reason with him. But reason had no place in Michael's mind anymore. His obsession with control had grown into something unrecognizable, a consuming paranoia that left no room for trust. Neighbors later reported hearing muffled shouts that evening, a disturbance they dismissed as an ordinary domestic spat. What they could not see was Michael's fury as he dragged Priya down the narrow wooden steps into the basement. The air was damp and cold, the space poorly lit by a single flickering bulb. Priya's cries for help never made it beyond the walls. The house stood silent, its secrets buried beneath the floorboards. Michael used the heavy chains he had purchased weeks earlier, wrapping them tightly around her wrists and ankles. Priya struggled, her fear rising with every clink of metal, but she was no match for his strength. He silenced her desperate pleas, convinced that this act of control would finally put an end to the fear that haunted him. Yet as the hours passed, his grip only grew harsher, his actions more violent. What began as a twisted attempt to keep her close soon crossed into irreversible brutality. At some point in the night, Priya stopped moving. The stillness of her body brought a chilling silence to the basement. Michael froze, staring at her as the realization sank in. He had not only silenced her voice but extinguished her life entirely. Panic flooded his mind. But instead of reaching out for help or confessing, he moved deeper into denial. His fear of exposure outweighed any sense of remorse. He convinced himself that he could hide what he had done, that no one would discover the truth if he acted carefully. He dragged her body into a corner of the basement, covering it with thick plastic sheets he had once told store clerks were for renovation work. On top of that, he stacked old storage boxers, creating the illusion of clutter. The smell of damp concrete and decay soon began to seep through the air, but Michael tried to mask it with air fresheners and constant cleaning. In the days that followed, Michael returned to his routine, as though nothing had changed. He shoveled snow from the driveway, greeted David Miller with his usual polite nod, and even exchanged small talk with Karen Lopez about the bitter weather. To everyone else, he was the same quiet neighbor they had always known. No one could have guessed that beneath his home, hidden away in the darkness, lay the body of his young wife. But secrets that dark cannot remain buried forever. Priya's absence was already beginning to raise questions, and the carefully constructed image Michael presented to the world would soon begin to crumble. Priya's sudden silence became the first crack in Michael's carefully crafted facade. Back in India, her parents grew increasingly anxious when her regular calls stopped without explanation. At first, Michael answered their inquiries with excuses. He told them Priya was adjusting to the winter, that she was tired, or that she had caught a mild flu. His tone was calm, practiced, and convincing enough to soothe them temporarily. But Annika, Priya's cousin, refused to believe these explanations. She had sensed something wrong during their last conversation. The hurried way Priya had whispered, the fear in her voice. When the calls ended altogether, Annika grew desperate. She contacted local authorities in Ontario and filed a missing person report. The police assigned Detective Laura Bennett to the case, a seasoned investigator known for her sharp instincts. She began by visiting the Turner residence. Michael greeted her at the door with the same politeness he showed to his neighbors, welcoming her inside as though he had nothing to hide. He claimed Priya had gone to visit a friend in another city and would return soon. His words were smooth, but his story contained gaps. When asked for details about this supposed friend, he stumbled, offering vague explanations that failed to convince. Laura noticed subtle signs that troubled her. The house was immaculate, almost unnaturally so, as if it had been scrubbed repeatedly. Family photos were scarce, and there were no recent pictures of Priya displayed anywhere. More unsettling were the cameras discreetly placed in the living room and hallway. Michael brushed them off as a precaution for security. But Laura suspected they were meant for surveillance of someone inside rather than strangers outside. As part of the investigation, neighbors were questioned. David Miller admitted he hadn't seen Priya for weeks, while Karen Lopez recalled hearing strange noises one night in January, but had dismissed them at the time. Their testimonies only deepened Laura's suspicions. With each interview, the picture of a young woman vanishing without trace became less plausible, and the possibility of something sinister hiding behind the Turner home grew stronger. Detectives checked Priya's phone records and found no outgoing calls after a certain date. There was no evidence of travel, no activity on her bank accounts, and no trace of her in local surveillance footage. To the investigators, it was as though she had vanished inside her own home. When Laura returned to the house with a search warrant, Michael's composure began to falter. The officers combed through each room, finding nothing at first but a strange unease that lingered in the air. It wasn't until they descended into the basement that the silence of the house broke into horror. Behind a row of stacked boxers and under layers of plastic, they uncovered what Michael had tried so desperately to conceal. The discovery was devastating. The damp basement became the center of a crime scene. Officers moving carefully around the covered remains of Priya Sharma. Michael was handcuffed on the spot, his calm demeanor replaced with a cold, vacant stare. The neighborhood, once so peaceful, was now the stage of a crime that would haunt it forever. News of the discovery in the Turner basement spread quickly, shaking both the quiet Ontario neighborhood and Priya's family thousands of miles away in India. Reporters crowded the street as police cars lined the driveway, their flashing lights reflecting off the snow. The shocking revelation that Priya had been hidden in her own home for weeks gripped the community with disbelief. How could the friendly man who waved at neighbors each morning conceal such darkness behind his walls? The story traveled internationally, framed as a tragedy of a young woman who had crossed an ocean in search of a new life, only to meet her end in a basement thousands of miles from home. Michael's arrest was only the beginning. During interrogation, he displayed little remorse. He admitted to restraining Priya, insisting he had acted out of fear she would abandon him. His words painted him not as a grieving husband, but as a man desperate to justify the unjust. Prosecutors built their case around this twisted mindset, portraying him as a controlling figure who viewed marriage as ownership. The hidden cameras, the locked doors, and the chains became damning evidence of a pattern of obsession and cruelty. In court, the details emerged in full. Detectives described the crime scene, the cold concrete floor of the basement, and the plastic-wrapped remains hidden beneath clutter. Priya's diary was introduced, its pages revealing her inner world of fear and isolation. She had written about her longing for freedom, her suspicions about Michael's purchases, and her desperation for contact with her family. Her words gave the jury a voice for the victim, a testimony that spoke louder than Michael's attempts to defend himself. Neighbors also took the stand. David Miller admitted he felt guilty for ignoring the signs of the absence of Priya, the sounds he dismissed as nothing unusual. Karen Lopez described her unease about never seeing Priya outside. Their accounts, though brief, highlighted how easy it was for abuse to remain hidden in plain sight. Each witness added another piece to the puzzle of a life controlled and silenced until it ended in violence. The trial concluded swiftly. The jury deliberated for only a short time before finding Michael Turner guilty of first-degree murder. The judge delivered a life sentence without the possibility of parole, condemning him to spend the rest of his days behind bars. For Priya's family, the verdict brought a measure of justice, but no relief from the grief of losing their daughter in such a cruel way. Annika wept as she left the courtroom, haunted by the memory of her cousin's last whispered phone call. The community, once proud of its safety and tranquility, was left scarred. The Turner home stood empty, its basement forever marked by the crime that had taken place there. For many, it became a reminder that appearances can deceive, that behind the neat lawns and polite smiles, unimaginable horrors can hide. Priya's story was retold in documentaries, articles, and news reports, serving as a warning about isolation, control, and the unseen dangers within seemingly perfect relationships. In the end, the tragedy was more than just the death of a young woman. It was the silencing of a life full of dreams, a story of hope that ended in horror. And it was a reminder that vigilance, compassion, and awareness are often the only defenses against the kind of darkness that thrives behind closed doors.